every morning. What a beautiful day. So I guess after a year it will wear out, but at the moment I'm still very much enjoying it. So quickly about Northwest University, where I'm a research professor. It's a multi-campus university, 3 campuses, and at the moment the second largest university in the country, with around 70,000 students, 70,000 students. Only UNISA is much larger, of course, with 350,000 students. So, but I'm a research professor at the Vaal Triangle campus. It's on the banks of the Vaal River in Vanderbilt Park. So our focus area is that very interesting urban and rural area, Free State, Sasolburg, Heilbron, and so forth, Parys. But then on the Gauteng side, specifically 2 historically, politically very important places, Sharpeville, and you'll remember 67, or no, 76, yeah. So 67 was Soweto. So, and then Boipatong, just before the democratic elections. So that's the kind of focus areas of our research in that region. So from next year on, 2017, we will present a master's in health promotion with a specific focus on gerontology, social gerontology. So it will be an e-based course on an e-platform. So distance is not a problem. So, and we're focusing on, specifically Africa. And then we also will start next year with PhDs. We already have 5 PhDs, specifically in social gerontology. So, interesting stuff going around with regard to training and so forth. At Oxford, this is a global institute. We're looking at global aging, global trends. And of course, the 3 drivers of population aging is lower mortality, just longer. So lower fertility. So that amazing lowering of fertility all across the world. Interestingly, also in South Africa, we're following that trend. But certain countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, are not following the trend. So there's a stalling of fertility. And we recently got a £5 million funding to specifically study that. Why there's stalling of fertility in some African countries, amongst others Kenya and so forth. So despite all the efforts to educate women and so forth, the stalling of fertility. In South Africa, of course, a different story. But I'll tell you more about all of that. So, okay, let's start the ethics of care, and that could be really intimidating. Ethics of care, very philosophical, and so forth. And of course, we don't want to go there, but more on that later. First, this is the face of Africa. So, it's the youngest continent and region in the world. And why do I start here? Because this is the reality we have to look at. So, that has implications for our relevance in Africa, for policy relevance, for practical relevance, programmatic relevance. Although we are busy working in the field of aging, and it's hugely important, as you will see just now, we have to remember, we should place it, we should position it within this youngest continent on the face of the world. So we're working with aging issues, older persons issues, within the context of the youngest region of the world. So you can imagine the implications policy-wise. You know, policy-wise, aging issues will always be under pressure because the focus is on the youth, young people, education, and so forth. So aging issues will always be crowded out. So let's make now peace with that. So that's the reality, that's the world we're going to work within. So, and we just need to be creative around it. Therefore, just for interest's sake. So a good entry point will always be intergenerational issues. You know, that nexus between younger generations and older generations, or the life course, but later a bit more on that. So this youngest continent on the face of the earth, and interestingly, even cabinet ministers, even that previous golden boy of the politicians in South Africa, Trevor Manuel, even he doesn't recognize that within this youngest continent, we have aging issues. So, for example, through the James Martin Institute, while he was busy developing his strategic plan for the country. So he visited Oxford, and we were invited to do a little presentation. And his only comment on the presentation on aging and population trends, population aging and so forth. In South Africa we haven't got that problem because the average life expectancy is 47. So we haven't got that problem. In the meantime, he himself is like 60. So the point is we'll always be confronted with this issue, the youngest continent. So what's going to happen? At the moment, we have around 7 billion people on the face of the earth. And that is expected to rise to 9 billion by 2050. You don't have to remember all these statistics, just for background. So, from 7 to 9 billion, the expectations. Interestingly, most of these billions, extra billions, towards 9 billion, will be from, yes, Africa. So, a huge population growth within Africa still, despite lowering of fertility in specific selected countries. But it's a blurry picture because we're not dead sure whether it only be 9 billion, because it also could be 10 billion. And then 2 billion will be for the count of Africa. So the point I want to make and emphasize is it is a young continent. So, and we absolutely have to recognize that. So at the very same time, all these billions of young people, and of course there could also be benefits for Africa. Because at the very same time, the rest of the world are really getting older and older. To just give you a bit of a perspective, in 2050, only in China, there will be around 300 million 65 pluses. Can you imagine 300 million 65 pluses only in China? And remember their interesting story, they did some engineering, social engineering with this one-child policy. And so theoretically, you know, a couple need to look after 4 old people. And there's no siblings. There's nothing else. Only that one child or couple with 4 siblings. And you can imagine also, because with population aging, we have more generations living together at the same time. So up to 5 generations. So you can imagine the pressure of these couples or these one-child families. So, but anyhow, so this is the also a trend in Africa. At the very same time, with all these young people, we also have this growth in the absolute numbers of older people. This is a 5-generation family. It was part of some research I did. The old lady right in the middle, 107 years old, and then the rest of the family. The lady in blue, around 75 years old, and then the rest of the generations. So people in Africa live in multi-generational households. Families, multi-generational families, and maybe 2 characteristics of families in sub-Saharan Africa. For those who want to do some research, don't use a household as a proxy for family. Because families in sub-Saharan Africa are multi-generational, you see them, but also educational. So they don't all necessarily live in one household. Anyhow, so because, for example, I think the granddaughter lives somewhere else, but her children, these small ones, the grandchildren, live with the grandmother. So it's these really complex family structures. So at the very same time, lots of young people, lots of older people. Let me give you the statistics. Are you still awake? So in sub-Saharan Africa, there will be a 4-fold increase in the number, the absolute number of older people. So from about 43 million, that's a bit dated now, 43 million to about 170 million older people in sub-Saharan Africa. And remember, apart from South Africa, no services at all. So let's rejoice in the privileges we have. Not always complain about them. So we've got so much to really be thankful for. So I just, Margie, so I'll involve you in this. So I just got an email yesterday from a government department from Kenya, and they want to come and do a study visit of facilities in South Africa, because you know, they realize they can't only depend on the family to care for these older people. They need to establish some facilities and so forth. So maybe you could expect a delegation from Kenya in the next year. So back to this. So to make a long story short, just for orientation, South Africa is proportionally the oldest country in sub-Saharan Africa, with around 8% of our population older than 60. And of course, in absolute numbers, Nigeria is the largest, has the largest older population. Of course, you know, right to the right of the screen, you have Mauritius. That's actually the oldest country in sub-Saharan Africa. Very, very, very small. Okay, so I think this is the basic trends I want to emphasize. Lots of young people. The focus will be there, policy-wise, programmatic-wise, and so forth. Lots of absolute numbers of older people at the very same time. So, but the priority will not be there. As Anna Kalash, a wonderful friend from the WHO, always says, you know, the developed world became wealthy and then old. Africa will still be poor, but will also grow. So, and how are we going to deal with all of that? And that has implications for ethics. So, you know, what is our priority? Which choices to make, and so forth. We will discuss that in a few moments. So another trend, and you know, maybe I should just say, we know that people grow old in a variety of settings in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, it's not only one country. So there's a lot of diversity and heterogeneity. But one of the basic trends we have in Africa is poverty. We have to acknowledge that. You know, we don't even know what to choose. Shall we attend the hungry session, or shall we attend the poverty session, or the HIV/AIDS session, and so forth? So, point is, this is the world we live in, and we have to kind of be realistic and place ourselves in this context when we think about issues, programs, policies, and so forth. Unemployment. Oh goodness, how terrible. You know, we currently have a research program towards the north of the country, towards Botswana, Taung. And you know, the unemployment percentage in that community, because somehow that community falls between the cracks in Northern Cape and Northwest Province. Unemployment percentage of 69%. My goodness. You know, it is a pathetic situation. So that's what we're dealing with. And you can imagine the pressure on the older people with their pension. So in settings like that. So unemployment is a huge issue. And point I want to make with regard to care, and we now on our way to get specifically focusing on care, is that longevity, even if achieved in a setting like this, then often entails a life of compromised health, with scant access to resources and health services, you know, basic health services, let alone, you know, specialized health services. Just for interest's sake, because I was quite involved with it through this African research network I'm coordinating. in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, we have 13 geriatricians. 13 geriatricians. Most of them from South Africa, 5 in private practice and approximately 5 in government settings, and the other 3 from Senegal, right on the west coast. Because, interestingly, just an interesting anecdotal little story, the previous president of Senegal, President Wade, like in his 90s, at his last election. And he then realized, oh my goodness, I'm getting on. So I will need some specialized assistance sometime or another. So he selected 3 GPs in Dakar and sent them to Grenoble in France, where they then specialized in geriatrics. So 13 geriatricians, 10 in South Africa, specialized, and 3 in Senegal. There you've got the story. So this is the interesting, fascinating world we live in. So, anyhow, longevity, that's a fact, but it will be a compromised longevity. Not a healthy longevity, but a disabled longevity. And you know the role of lifestyle diseases, NCDs, non-communicable diseases, hypertension specifically, and so forth, and so forth. At Northwest University, we wanted to start an intervention with regard to hypertension through technology, mobile phones. But then we realized, oh my goodness, we know all these goggles and older people have mobile phones, but we don't know how they use it. So which functions and so forth. So we did a beautiful project on the use of mobile phones by older people, and we're busy writing it up. And then when we get behind the patterns, the user patterns, we'll be able to use that, the interventions, to utilize it in interventions. But interestingly, one of the major findings was, or is, it's an intergenerational project. So if you target older people and hypertension, you will also have to target the grandchild and so forth. And it doesn't decrease the status of these older goggles in the household. Actually, it increases their status. Because it's like, they've got a whole secretariat, you read this text or you do this. And the other interesting thing is the negotiation going on around that. They will say, okay, Grandma, I'll read it, the text, or I'll make the call. But then can I quickly also call a friend on the airtime, and so forth. So fascinating relationships going on there. We should explore that. Okay, let's move nearer to the care. Just still background. What do we have? I made this little comparison between Nigeria, now South Africa and Brazil. Nurses per 10,000 of the population, 16 in Nigeria, 41 South Africa, 64 in Brazil. Brazil had a huge drive regarding care and geriatric services and so forth. A dedicated policy, Nigeria, yes, South Africa, although we're critical, so we've got something. So, that's more than many, many countries can say. So, dedicated legislation, and dedicated institution on aging and so forth. So, just to give you a bit of that background. Okay. So the question is, depending on where you live and your socioeconomic status, the question is, will longevity be the new inequality? If you can afford it, you can live a high quality life. If you can't, sorry. So, this is a lady at a clinic near Emma Schleini, or Witbank, I don't know, in Mpumalanga. So maybe it's all names you don't even know. So, but it's a fairly big industrial city in Mpumalanga. So in the wheelbarrow. The lady there is my mother, to the left, and my sister. So my mother is now 80 years old, she's 80 there. So she's beautiful. But don't be fooled by this photo. I also mentioned that at the Care Festival. She had 2 hip replacements, 2 knee hip replacements, a shoulder replacement, and so forth. So, but that made all the difference. Because she has the ability and she could afford to have a better quality of longevity. So, point I want to make is, when we think ethics, we should think about the world, the context we live in. And it has implications. Inequality. Who can afford what? Who will get what? If we speak quality of life and so forth, we have to be sensitive, because there are people that will never be able to share in the type of quality of life we've got at the back of our heads. So, if we address today the whole issue of ethics, I don't want to go into bioethics. That is really a speciality in itself. Maybe Margie could organize, a medical doctor, a bioclinician, and so forth, to deal with that. I also don't want to go into medical ethics. The whole thing is, who should get the hip replacement? The 60-year-old one or the 90-year-old one? So, legal ethics, that's, a speciality in itself. So, that would be a next session. So, and, this whole ethics thing, you don't want to be at a university now, trying to do a research project, and you have to go through all these protocols and so forth, where you actually at the end question the ethics of the ethics committee, the way in which they treat people and so forth. You don't want to go into that. So I want to, for us to explore it on a very, very kind of practical, very practical way. And that's why I've chosen the approach, the ethics of care approach. So, and I'll share that with you in a moment. So, I also don't want to go into the whole issue of radical longevity. That whole idea of, with all this replacement therapy, you could actually create a human being that could live, and this is this guy's philosophy, could live forever, 1,000 years. They're thinking about brain transplants and stuff like that. So, I don't want to go into all of that. Quite interesting, pushing the boundaries, Aubrey de Grey, at, should I say this word, at Cambridge. So, you know, at Oxford we don't say the C word. So, the other place. He's from the other place. So Aubrey a bit, you know, really pushing the boundary. He's a bit on the edge, I have to say. So we won't go there. So we'll keep it quite civilized today. I want us to follow the idea of Joan Tronto, and I quoted it on your program. And I think that is beautiful. And, you know, from whichever discipline you are, you will be able to identify with her view of what the ethics of care is. So, Joan Tronto, American, says and describes care as everything, and I'll focus today on this, everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world. World there, your immediate context, so that we can live in it as well as possible. It's not unrealistic, as well as possible. And in order to be able to do that, so she focuses, and the care ethicists focus on relations and the situation. So relations within a specific situation. It's an ethics, you know, kind of anti-aging stuff, replacement therapy, extreme longevity. This is very American, you know, you can do it. So, live to 150, yes. So, we're not going to go that way. Ons gaan nie daai jam-like vislike 3x3. Ons is so good. We're not going to focus on the DNA stuff, the genetic stuff. So, and we're not interested in these old guys. You know, sorry, I can't read there. So, but anyhow, very unapproachable. You can't deal with these guys. And they find their power in putting people down. So these ethics methods. So usually philosopher or minister from some other religion and so forth, very dogmatic and so forth. We're not going there. So we're trying to deal with it from a different perspective. Now I just want to ask you to, let's have a bit of interaction. A very simple kind of exercise, and I don't want to really tire you with all kinds of more exercises. So, but if you think care, close your eyes for a moment, think care, and then just jot down a word or two, a first word or two that comes to your mind. Or maybe if you want to make a pen sketch, you know, care is symbolized by this or that or whatever. Just very quickly, you know, like a minute or two. Care, if you think care, what is the core thing you think about? Nothing is wrong or right. So it won't be dealt with those guys. What is care in your mind's eye? Okay, so let's quickly get it. So when you heard the word care, what came up? What did you think?
Responsibility.
Responsibility. That's an abstract one. Responsibility. Empathy.
Comes from the heart.
Heart.
Relationship.
A relationship. Compassion.
Respect.
Understanding, need.
Support.
Assistance, support. Love. Holistic. Respect. So, good. So I, thank you very much. I had this little exercise of just kind of Google care. And specifically the images. And this is what I found. Very sweet. Yeah. I really struggled to get a black hat. Interesting. So I don't know why.
Could have got plenty from our photographs. From
Yeah, I should have asked you. But, this is what I got. Easily. So all these hands, care, kind of this kind of, I think it depicts relationship, that's it all. So, compassion, that's it all. Yeah. And that's of course true. It's part of the picture. But I think Joan Tronto wants to move beyond only this. Joan Tronto wants to take us to something more concrete. She wants to take us to that everything. So, and I want us to explore that today. This everything by Joan Tronto. So let's explore it and see whether we can find something in the two case studies I gave you. So I'm going to, this is my personal research. So you have a course with two case studies. So let me go through the first one. Let me go with you through all of it. So this is research I did quite a long time ago, 10 years ago, in 2005 approximately, in a very upmarket retirement village in Pretoria, the first one. And the second one was an older lady in a rural area. Okay, let's. I haven't read it aloud for quite a bit because, and I remember how this touched me, this story, as the researcher. God is a pink knee blanket. 74 at that stage, Centurion Gauteng. Okay. Maybe we should then just leave this for a moment. Is it okay? Margie, you'll keep me on time.
Yes, so we're going to go until 10:30.
Okay, so this will be perfect. So, once through the security gate, you know these retirement villages, gated communities. Once through the security gate, I was looking for number 54. Right and left again, left, and then I saw a garden, beautifully laid out, colourful, manicured to almost perfection, this little garden. And to my surprise, because I'm a gardener, so I always notice gardens, to my surprise it happened to be number 54. And I was quite excited. And through the open glass door, I saw Mrs. J arranging hydrangeas, pink and blue. It was 4 years ago. This is now her story. His only words, her husband, weeks after we had been to the doctor, were, I've got I was dumbfounded. The doctor could have at least have involved me. But he instructed me to wait in the waiting room. I always knew that he, my husband, was philandering around. I wanted to leave him on numerous occasions, but you know, with 3 small children, being only a housewife with no qualifications, she interrupted herself. My parents were still alive at that time. I just couldn't do it. So I stayed. But I don't want to talk about that part of my life. My pastor and I already dealt with that. What are we going to do now? She asked. His words were, we go on as always. I cared for him up till the day he died, 8 months later. And then my world collapsed. There I was, all alone, a 70-year-old woman at that stage, a mother, a grandmother, with this disease I got for being an obedient wife. Free at last, but now ruled by a new master. I spent my days in a little heap on the couch, and my only comfort was when Rachel, my domestic help, covered me with a pink knee blanket. In the heat of Polokwane, Petersburg, covered with this pink blanket. Me, God, the pink blanket, and a life of always being on my guard and trying to steer clear from the children's and grandchildren's questions. What is wrong, Oma, and so forth. I just felt I never had a choice in all of this. I moved to Pretoria, and for the first time I had to tell my new doctor and my new pastor about my situation. Where in the past, I was the one that was being informed or not informed on other people's terms. This time, I had to take some initiative. This new chapter, They were wonderful and supportive. I now realize that I never should have kept it to myself for that long. Over a period of 2 years, I've informed my children and grandchildren, as well as my 4 neighbors, interesting, and the home nursing system. I am, however, still not ready to face, the public, the retirement village. Sometimes I feel so jealous of the cancer patients for the spontaneous sympathy and support they get from practical everyone. I sometimes even wonder whether I'll one day be allowed into the friend care facility. But anyhow, I'm thinking about starting a small support group, not necessarily around this disease, in general, just to, support people. On a subsequent visit, the nurse from the home nursing service arrived, and after a while she started sharing her crisis with regard to her youngest son being arrested for possession of drugs. And we listened in silence to the story, the researcher, and this older lady, a story that seemed too pressing and unmanageable to handle. Mrs. J held her hand. Come and see my daughter. She kind of diverted. If only I could have used the 2,000 rands at that point a month I have to spend on antiretrovirals to rather buy new clothes. I saw her in the car mirror while driving out. A well-groomed lady with blue-tinted hair, like so many others. Okay, I want you to just turn 2233, as you're comfortable, to each other, and just raise the ethical issues you've identified in this little story, maybe one, maybe a half, maybe three. So, but which do you think are the ethical issues? You know, in caring for this person, making the world better for this person and for us all. So, just a quick chat. About HIV, AIDS, orphans, somewhere in a rural area, and so forth. It is very near to us. So, and most people actually don't even know how near. So, okay, so what did you come up with? So, let's go table by table without kind of pressurizing you. But if you feel uncomfortable, just say move on. So let's hear anybody. So
We think that the fact that she didn't have anybody to talk to and she had to keep it to herself for such a long time shows the stigma of the illness, but it also says something about the facility, that she didn't have anybody that she trusted. In other words, there was no meaningful relationship that she could talk to about this disease. Also, the fact that in her suffering, the person who was supposed to come and help her actually saw her as a confidant. So instead of the person listening to her, but is that also an issue, you know, for us? As
yes, maybe we could discuss that later on. You know, we will kind of focus on that specifically more. You know, the place of the carer. Yeah, is it always just kind of providing care, or is the relationship that goes both ways? And I think that's a huge kind of discussion point with regard to the ethics of care. But I'm so glad you raised it. It's a fascinating one. So thank you very much. Let's not be too.
I think we jumped onto the fact that she was not told.
She was not told. Yeah.
But looking at
By the health professional.
That's right. But looking
I
at
still
the
find,
surrounding
you know, I
time,
get actually quite angry when I read this, but that's how my emotions
I looked at the surrounding times at that time.
at that point.
They weren't allowed to tell everyone.
Yes.
They were not allowed to. So although it was legally, the doctor was probably right, legally, ethically, it was wrong.
Yeah.
But I do see both sides of the argument.
Yes.
He was stuck. He wasn't allowed to. Without the husband's permission, he could not tell them.
So, you know, you guys bring us to the point where we will discuss the whole issue of justice and, you know, the relationship. So that tension between rights, justice, and so forth, and the relationship. Thank you for putting it on the table. Yes. Anybody else? So, yeah, please.
We just wondered about the ethics of being allowed into the time for the job and having any questions about being allowed into the frail care. Is it that she shouldn't have been those questions at all? She shouldn't have been.
Yes. But I guess it relates to the stigma. Yeah. No, she just didn't. She was still very unsure how she would be treated once it.
I think also the statement, the bottom saying that she feels so jealous of cancer patients. I think that's a very, very important statement in that lady's lifetime.
Yeah.
Because it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know where cancer comes from. But we feel sorry for cancer people. But we feel sorry for HIV.
Don't you think think she kind of verbalized her situation just so amazing. In a few sentences. So just, she knows herself, she knows the situation, she knows what she wants to say about it and thinks about it. Just to get that opportunity to be able to trust somebody to share it.
What we discussed here is that we try to be progressive and compassionate ourselves in dealing with sexuality amongst our residents, not Marina, but one of our own. And in fact, promiscuity from a lady who had dementia. And we never got to the point of discussing the possibility of her HIV status.
So, lots of fascinating issues. I would love somebody to say something about Rachel. Is it Rachel? Yeah. Yeah, that is. Yeah, that's part of Joe Toronto's. Everything we can do to make that moment, that situation better. So we should stop thinking about ethics as DNA, genes, only that. So, or we degrade with these fascinating stories about living up to 1,000 years and so forth, extreme longevity. Who will then inherit anything? What about inheritance? All that stuff. So, the ethics of the ordinary. So we'll get there. So, and to deal with it within my particular situation. So there and there. So any other comments? So please.
We've just discussed in and around the process of to treat or not to treat. Whose choice is it?
Yeah, that's a huge one.
Yeah, and then also we look at confidentiality and privacy. Who discloses and who just doesn't disclose.
Yes, it relates to that issue. Yeah.
On the other hand, you cannot really care for someone if you don't really know him or her. You have to know him. You have to know all these things if you really want to care.
Yeah.
And what you said is on the other hand, does she want to be really cared for?
So the huge ethical question is, do we kind of create the kind of environment that enables people to trust management, carers, and so forth, with these kind of issues? Because somehow, some of these people created that environment for her. So, the pastor, for change, he got it right. So, and so forth. So, some of, and this home, I guess, sometimes making yourself vulnerable as a carer, as this own nursing system. So maybe, I don't know, but maybe that gave the opportunity to also share her vulnerability. Of course, she it's her own responsibility, isn't it?
But she was the primary caregiver,
Yes.
and she was not.
Oh, sorry. No, I refer to the workplace. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Today,
Yes.
was not educated in how to care for her.
And put herself at risk.
Yeah, of course. She just takes what she
That's why we told them that
Yeah, yeah. 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 we're speaking about different people. So first, Mrs. J and her caring activity to the infected husband. And then, of course, the domestic help, that relationship. And we also mentioned the relationship with the home nursing assistant. So that makes it fascinating. It's this whole, because that's also an ethical issue. Who's part of this whole care network? How do they relate to each other? How do they position themselves in relation to each other and so forth? So you will see in a later example, it's all about hierarchies. So, you know, those of you in the nursing profession will know about hierarchies, but we'll share and deal with that.
Doctor, I was just going to say, when she got to the Pretoria place, she did say they were wonderful and so supportive. And that was the first time that she felt actually confident enough to now reach out to start. And she said, but it still took her over a period of 2 years to share with the family. But obviously she's not in an acute situation, so there's no blood and gloves and that, so she's only on an antiretroviral, so she's in her own lovely environment where she had her garden and all that. But the other thing that I also think, even though that particular nurse didn't know her status or didn't know that she had something terrible, I think the fact that this lady was in a compromised position with the diagnosis that she knew about, she obviously must have had experience that carer felt safe to tell her a story. Because you're obviously like getting into his face or something that the person could see, look, somehow this lady will understand when I tell my story, and then she could take it to the common.
Fascinating. So I think we should start wrapping up, please. Last.
It's also made me think that as the populations age and people are living longer with AIDS and enter establishments, facilities, there possibly has to be something in place for people who live longer with AIDS in places. I kind of don't put the AIDS and care facilities together, but it's made me think that yes, this will happen in the future.
We have to be realistic about it. You know, we know from data that the fastest growing age group with regard to infection is older people. You know, growing old with the infection or being infected after 60 or in their 50s. So the stats are out there. So it is an issue you know, I should have brought that slide along. Maybe I'll find it in the tea time. To just show you the prevalence of HIV/AIDS in Southern Africa in relation to the rest of the world. It is just mind-boggling. So, but anyhow, so I don't want us to focus on that specifically. So, but the ethical issues, there might be another TB or whatever. We can also look at those issues. But I hope you get a sense that ethics is not only, you know, this high to come by abstract DNA stuff and genes and biomedical stuff and so forth. It's about everyday situations, relationships. It's about just, you know, that symbol of a pink knee blanket on the person. You know, can you imagine Rachel? She didn't know what's going on, but she at least got the sense something is not okay. You know, what can I do? I can only offer. So we're going. Let's quickly go through the next one. Interestingly, So we'll delve into this more, the aesthetics of the ordinary, as part of an ethics of care. So I'll give you a bit of a definition after these two. Okay, next one. In kind of the really opposite world. I got lost on my way to this God-forsaken place. Somewhere between Zijwater and Frischgewaag. You know, these are now names from the north. So, the family room was red and shiny. A red lounge suite, a red carpet, red artificial flowers, a shiny Wi-Fi, a shiny table, and a shiny TV. Big one. Oscar, a grandchild busy preparing food, took me to Mrs. M's room. My eyes found it difficult to adjust to the darkness. There she was on the disordered bed, and a heap of grey blankets on the floor. The place was in all shades of grey. She was desperately ill. This disease, she said, it is like walking along the road and a lorry hits you. If it happens, it happens. You do not have a choice. Very similar to the other lady, interesting. She remarked fatalistically, please bring me a food parcel and help me to get a pension. Look at her age, 59. Yogurt, lettuce, and liver, please. I left perplexed and stayed perplexed. Seemingly, her husband and even the children dumped her. You know, within that shiny house, with a shiny lounge, in the room next door, they dumped her. She was depressed and isolated. I understood her request for a pension, but given the contents of the rest of the house and the meal prepared by Oscar, I just didn't understand the request for food. Maybe, you know, some of comfort or something like that, I don't know. I heard the noise in the kitchen and smelled the food. She requested food. So, although still married, the husband was seemingly totally disengaged from the situation. I struggled to get the information regarding the grounding aid through the conventional channels. It was actually a nightmare, because I just felt responsible. I should do something. Mrs. M is still too young to qualify for an old age pension, and the queue at social development, whether it was only to get some basic information or waiting for counseling, was one and the same. Hours long. Just to come myself was the prompt reply. Next, at least I got some applications. Each time I went there, I got lost again to this lady's place, somewhere between Frischgewaag and Zijwater. This time around, the family room was empty, only the red carpet. See, sir, the funerals are so expensive, the intoxicated husband commented. The church took her to a hospice and she passed away on that date. I urged him to go for an HIV/AIDS test. She was his only one. As there was nothing to do about anything, I left. The forms tossed on the passenger seat. It all ended before we could even begin. Mrs. M, at least I got the forms. A contact at the department helped me. I have tried. I wanted to say. Okay, so let's think about the ethical issues here. Just briefly, and then we'll have some answers. So, just the same kind of exercise. Maybe just one of the issues. So any interesting issue? Yes?
that she had made like that. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Proud of
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And now
And now, yeah, yeah. So, good. So that could be interesting. That's an interesting question. So, yeah.
That she was actually isolated because the husband had definitely it's her fault.
It seems like.
Because she was
Yeah.
dumping this message for
Yeah,
him
yeah,
to
yeah.
eat on her own and reach out.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I guess the ethical issue here is, we're all linked to institutions,
Yes.
or most of us, So, but out there, we have to ask ourselves as institutions, the majority of older people in Africa and in South Africa, age in place.
Yes.
And what is our relationship, to that situation from an ethical point of view and so forth? So I guess that's one of the huge issues on the table. It's very close to us because my mother-in-law lives in the community, in a small free-state town. And Amanda, my wife, and I struggle with that literally every day. What will her situation be? What possibilities do we have? Because she loves her garden, she loves the trees she planted, and I can't just, take her out and put her in a gated community with paving.
I'm sure the community supports.
But anyhow, so these are the issues we have to think. This is more than we think. Actually, in the majority of cases in our country, people are. Please, so
We looked at poverty because there's a grandchild that's taking care of this lady. And first of all, it's very clean, neat and tidy, but everything's been removed for the funeral. So there's a lack.
something somewhere. So, how do we relate that to the ethical issues? I guess resources.
No, but they were,
Yeah,
so they live in this nice, really nice house.
yeah.
And there's food cooking, but they wouldn't care for her. But they care enough, so it's about appearances,
Yeah.
but they would sell what they have to pay for a funeral, because funerals are expensive. And sometimes in their culture, the bigger the funeral,
Yeah.
the better.
Yes, yeah. So the ethical issue about these funerals, how do we deal with that, Because older people are really bankrupted by these funerals. Did you experience anything of this, Marty, in, say, the rural areas in KwaZulu-Natal? The impact of funeral?
Oh, it's huge on their income in that
Yes,
household.
yes,
It's depleted by funerals.
There's a lovely book, When Cuckoos Go to Heaven. I can't remember who wrote it, the person who made the cakes in Kingali. And these people relocate from Kenya, I think, to Tanzania, to southern Africa, like Swaziland. And he brings this up. They used to kill the cow, and then they had to have a cleansing ceremony. Obviously, funerals might involve thing. After the person's been dead, there's a cleansing ceremony. You can go and all this. This used to involve, slaughtering the cow and respect and hospitality involved in this. But now with AIDS and the people, they couldn't afford, and this for them was really important because it was placating the ancestors and connecting with them. And now they had to supply us with a handful of goat meat, and because it was happening with such frequency, And if you ever get the chance to read it, it's the most amazing. Yeah, it is. And we Cuckoos Go to Heaven.
Good. Thank you so much. We could spend hours, on these things. But I want to wrap up and say, with regard to this last case, I think we as institutions should play around with the idea of our place in a society like South Africa, where most of our older people will age in place in poverty in the community. Just with regard to the HIV/AIDS prevalence, so this is a depiction of the relative size of populations and their countries. Look at to the right, and you see the purple blob there. Usually a very tiny island, but in relation to their population size, Japan, is a really huge country there. So look at Australia, down under, so very tiny and minute, and so forth. Africa, you see the huge relative size of India and China, with a huge population. With regard to HIV/AIDS, we did the same. My colleagues at the University of Sheffield. This guy now is a professor at Oxford. This is HIV/AIDS prevalence. So, we are the epicenter of HIV/AIDS, Southern Africa. Look at Lesotho and Swaziland. Usually tiny dots on the map. Look at them. So this is the reality. We have to think about our lives and our ideas, our policies, our programs, and so forth in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. It's time for tea. So,
Just before you go to
11
tea,
o'clock.
can I just ask you to have to sign this, please give us your details.
Of care approach. Interestingly, we just had a good chat. And the ethics of the waiting list, for example. So I find that a fascinating one. And there's a huge lot of power there. So who's supposed to be considered and who not? So the ethics of care approach. My mantra, don't think extraordinary, think about the everyday relationships and situations. What is ethical is that which fosters the flourishing of relationships and of each living being within a given relationship. And this implies the care recipient, the caregiver, the manager, and so forth, the care activity. It's the whole story. Remember when we explored the idea of care, somebody said holistic and so forth. Yes, that's what it's called.
What does worry me about care, ethics of care? We're not taking into account personal judgmental things, perhaps, of the carers.
Yeah.
And we all have them. It doesn't matter what to say.
Indeed.
We have personal feelings about everything.
Yeah.
So where's our ethics coming in?
Yes.
Is it just what we are told?
Yes, let's discuss that a bit later. I've got it on my agenda. So, and please, if we don't discuss it, remind me. So this is basically the approach about, it's a relational issue. Not a kind of clinical, objective approach. Of course, there is an ethical approach like that. I'll summarize it in a moment. An ethics of care approach is emphasized in those traditions in which we see compassion as central to interpersonal flourishing. Remember, you guys mentioned the word compassion, flourishing, enabling environments. Now, this is not a strange concept in the field of aging. In the Madrid Plan, we have a whole section on enabling environments. So, whatever that may be. An ethics of care approach assumes that ethics is formed in and through our relationships with others. So the interesting thing with an ethics of care approach, it's kind of opposed to a Kantian, Immanuel Kant approach, where you have these static principles. This is this, and that is that, and this is this, and so forth. This is more kind of an organic, relational approach. But, of course, these principles should be considered. They should be considerations. So, it's not necessarily the all, but they should be considered in these relationships, but a bit more. Reflection on principles is secondary to the attentiveness and care with which we nurture relationships. So, sometimes something has to give. You know, for example, there's this classic example of this husband and his wife got ill, and there was this specific drug, unaffordable, and then he stole some of the drugs. And now the question, is that ethical, or should we adhere to the principle, and so forth? With regard to research, let me give you another practical example. What is the principle in all good research? Confidentiality or anonymity. But lately, when we work with older persons in rural communities, they actually request us to mention their names, because this research gives them voice. You know, their unheard stories and so forth. So, what now with regard to the principle? So, there it was kind of the relationship, the kind of negotiation and so forth. So, this tension always between the principle and the actual situation and so forth. So, for example, the waiting list. If you're first on the waiting list, you're first. So, but then, probably another process also kicks in, you know, to consider situations and so forth and so forth. So, good. So, nothing black and white. But it is a big statement. The ethics of care begins with the conception of moral life. You know, there's a departure point. It might be religion, it might be the Bill of Rights, it might be the Constitution or whatever. The ethics of care begins with the conception of moral life as a network of relationships with specific people. And it sees living well as caring for those people, attending to their needs and maintaining their trust. So the relational thing, you know, the agreements, the network, and so forth. To be loving, loyal, and dependable is to be a specific kind of person which is very different from impartially just doing your duty. And this is our crisis in our hospital, specifically. Worldwide. So we now have in the UK the Francis report. And you know, these nurses all tick the boxes. But there's no care. People actually die of hunger in those wards. So, and it's this thing. To be loving, loyal, and dependable is to be a specific kind of person, which is very different from impartially just doing your duty. So, and you know, the problem with, for example, the caring industry in the UK is What do they do now? They just implement more bureaucracy. Rules, boxes to tick, and so forth. But I'll later share with you, there's a whole new drive by the NHS on compassionate care, to move away from this doing your duty to more compassion. Margaret, I think the challenge for us at this Careforum will be, how do we teach our carers compassion, these things? We need to address that at some point.
I don't know how
So,
you how
but how you do it, I don't know.
Can you teach them?
So, I think inherently, there are some possibilities in a country like South Africa with the so-called philosophy of Ubuntu. But, I think it will be a huge task, but how to unleash that thing that could be there.
And Ubuntu is falling away.
Yeah. No, indeed.
People moving away
Yeah.
from their little village.
No, indeed. But, I see it, in Johannesburg, where people still care for each other. Why there, but not, say, in the Helen Joseph Hospital? So, why do I see, because I work in these communities, rural communities, why do I see remnants of Ubuntu and people really sacrificing themselves for other people? But that same person, when she works in the Helen Joseph Hospital, turns into something else.
I think because they're sucked in by the system.
The system.
There's no power against the system.
Yeah. But anyhow, those are the issues. In a small sense, I guess, you also deal with this in your institution.
But I mean, the most we can do is to try and get our carers to think of people they're looking after as, how would you like it if it was your mom or your dad? But even that doesn't always work.
See, we'll get to that reciprocity. Doesn't always work. So,
Sometimes carers work long hours,
yeah.
they don't get paid well.
They're not cared for in
They're
a
not
certain
cared
sense,
for.
maybe.
They've got hard jobs, physical
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah.
I think sometimes a resentment must come in to a certain thing, because they're going home after 12-hour shift. I mean, it's...
Good. But anyhow, so these issues are the issues, I know there are no, absolutely no easy answers. But these are the issues we have to grapple with. This idea of impartially doing your duty, that's not enough. It's part of it, but it's really not the whole story. So, okay, two models. This is now on a continuum. Think of the extremes. So in between are all kinds of configurations. So the justice model, there you've got it. Emphasis on autonomy. So it's about rights, my rights, autonomy, and so forth. I'm the client, I pay, that kind of thing. So, in opposition on the other extreme, not opposite, no, that's absolutely not the right word to use. So, yeah, it's part of the same coin. So, but the other side of the coin. So, emphasis on the relationships. You consider autonomy, and please note that I don't use the word independence. In Africa, we should not use the word independence. So we're all interdependent, somehow or another. Races, generations, and so forth. Of course, autonomy. But not autonomy in the extreme sense, because you're always in these relationships. So there's always the idea of negotiation. Rule and principle directed, more context dependent. So, of course, we strive for the midway somehow.
I think the problem is that you cannot measure the ethics of care. It's not measurable. So you cannot show little progress or whatever.
Now
If they use the justice model, you
that's
can
right.
measure it.
Yes, yeah. So appeal to what is just, appeal to compromise and accommodation, focus on integrity, focus on caring responsiveness. So Jake, and interestingly, there were really fascinating research experiments on this. Males tend to the justice model, generally. And you know, females, the feminization of care, so you know it worldwide, will tend to that one. Jake, Stevie's wrong. Amy, probably knowing that famous example about the husband and the drugs, it depends.
Not in nursing.
So,
In nursing,
Yeah.
you can get justice model.
Yeah.
Although we shouldn't be, that is what we are.
yeah. So, okay. So, these are on the continuum, the extremes. So I think we should play around with the configurations, and that could be quite interesting, depending on the context. Listen again. It's situational. That's the important. Good. 4 key elements, quickly. Moral attention. One must pay attention to the complexity of the situation, gather information, and immerse oneself into the principal issues. You know, there's a nice combination of a configuration, principles, and the relational context. So, next element, sympathetic understanding. I'll just kind of mention the story of Iris Murdoch and her daughter-in-law. Iris Murdoch, the literary figure from Oxford, and she actually, sorry, Alzheimer's, yeah. She couldn't stand her daughter-in-law somehow. And then she kind of had to make this move in herself, you know, this sympathetic understanding. From seeing her as vulgar to seeing her as naive and charming. So I won't go into it. It's actually quite beautiful how and you know, the daughter-in-law didn't even notice it, but somehow it kind of happened in Iris herself, you know, to make that change. So a relationship awareness. This is an issue of accounting and accountability to each other, towards each other, management to the carers, carers to the care recipients, even care recipients to the carers. You know, we live in such a fascinating place. I would love to do a project on this. Because we only have this one cohort who experienced apartheid, you know, from its birth, and are now sharing institutions with black older people and so forth. You know, that relationship awareness between care recipients in an institution, and care recipients and the carers. So fascinating. Good. And then the last one, harmony. One must respond in a way that balance is preserved and nurtured. Also with regard to the care. And it relates to the burnout issue and so forth, you know, pacing oneself. But do we allow our carers to pace themselves? Do we?
We allow them to they rush themselves.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
Yeah.
yes it is.
Yeah.
So can I just we want, it's going to take a longer time to actually really connect with your person and make it a meaningful relationship and all that kind of thing and attract the whole person into God. Because at the same time, that carer has to have so many people ready at a certain time, and you can move the time a little bit, and now you be, say, I'm just going to simplify and say two different kinds of people. You have the one that engages more and sees to the whole person, but they are, and then they talk, and then they frustration to the quick ones who don't really talk so much, but now they get more carers to the table quicker. So it's these are the carers are different types of people, so we can say it is in a way the carer's choice. But you still have almost like a deadline to meet. And so it is still due to the functionality and practicality of a place where a residency, if you want to put it that way, there's always a bit of a pull and push and whatever.
Yeah, and you know, that's exactly that balance. You know, how to somehow get it. I don't think it will ever.
But it should be the resident's choice, not the carer's choice.
It should be, but it's different.
Because we work in their home. They don't live in our workplace. And I think we always need to remind ourselves of this.
But I think, you know, the whole idea of balance is that all the role players should be considered. Of course, given the situation, you know, one will be the focus, I suppose. So, yeah, tricky. Good. Gilligan, she's one of the major exponents of the ethics of care, identify these stages of the ethics of care. I'll quickly go through it and also show you a kind of a simplified version. So level 1 generally is orientation to individual survival. You know, me. Then there's a transition from selfishness to responsibility, and this could maybe give us a bit of a framework to work with if we want to address some of these issues. So first stage, survival, me, individual. Then the transition, the connection to others. And then level 2, goodness as self-sacrifice, reliance on others, social acceptance and so forth. And then a second transition, goodness to truth, questioning comparative value of self versus others. And then the third level, morality of non-violence, heightened understanding of choice between own needs and care for others, that balance. So, do not harm others or yourself. I'm still... Yeah, always. So I'm still struggling with that idea that we thought of. You know, do we give people the opportunity to not harm myself? You know, because people know themselves. So, but are there procedures? Are there kind of space? But that's an interesting question to address. A simplified version. So, pre-conventional, I love me, I love you. Conventional, I love you more than me. And then post-conventional, I love myself and. So that's really kind of the balance. Good. You all know, I guess, that beautiful poem, or well-known poem, See Me. Do you know? Yeah. So I think it's a bit cliche-ish already, but it moves towards, you know, that focus, you know, see me carer, or see me manager, with the carer, can we say. So, the important thing in ethics of care is awareness and attentiveness in the present moment. Have any one of you met Andries Paul? Apart from Mark and Susan. So, Andries Bart, he will be here next year, February. He developed this theory of presence. He's the father of the theory of presence. At the University of Utrecht, it's about you being there in the moment. And it relates to attentiveness, to aandacht. So, to raak, iemand raak te sien. So, the sacrament of the present moment. There's even a wonderful Greek word. So, kairos, the kairos moment. The moment in time. So, that I think summarizes the whole idea of presence. And attentiveness play a huge role in all of this. Just quickly, this prayer that kind of touches on some of the issues regarding attentiveness. Heighten my awareness, God. This sensitivity. Because, you know us all. So, we live our lives, and you drive to a place, and when you arrive, you can't even remember how you got there. So, this whole idea of awareness. Sharpen my senses. Enlarge my capacity for compassion. Reshape my attitudes. Remind me to slow down so that I take in the wonder of the present moment. Heighten my awareness. So, especially in France, a whole huge academic movement around the present moment, the ordinary, the aesthetics of the everyday, the non-event. So, because we have our meetings around the events, the 20% events, but the 80% non-events, the things that actually work, in an automatic, organic sense, we don't celebrate them. So, and I think, this whole idea of an ethics of care, an ethics of the ordinary, an ethics of the vulnerable, so the ethics of the small, these are the focus of an ethics of care. Attentiveness, yes. I know I've not always been attentive of husband's tear tray. And then, I want to focus in on this whole idea of the ordinary, or the everyday, or a word I never knew about, quotidian. So, and the meaning of that is occurring every day, daily, and so forth. There's a whole philosophical movement around these things. I will not go into the detail of it. So, but Emerson wrote this beautiful piece. I ask not for the great, the remote, the romantic. What is dreaming Italy or Arabia? What is Greek art or Provençal ministerially? I embrace the common. I explore and sit at the feet of the familiar, the low. Give me insight into today, and you may have the antique and future worlds for yourself. So, give me insight into today. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's about the close at hand. It is about knowing the meaning of the close at hand. The meal in the firkin, the milk in the pan, the ballad in the street, the news of the boat, the glance of the eye, the form and the gait of the body. So, the order, the poor, the child in the street, the household. These are the new objects that will be necessary to see. So, see new these ordinary stuff. It's in a sense to realize the world, to realize the everyday world, to realize the non-events. There are no longer two worlds, ordinary and extraordinary. The world is one, which always and ordinarily remains for us to discover and to describe. And then trust your discovery. Educate your experience. There's this whole movement of mindfulness. Have mindful, everyday experiences. The sandwich you had, the coffee, the tea. The little chat we had about the waiting list in Stellenbosch. And then we discover actually the world is so small because she knows my mother-in-law, which I mentioned a bit earlier. So, as Emerson writes, I cannot get it nearer to me. Experience, close or not, is naturally vulnerable to failure. So this is the interesting thing. So we should also experience failure. The vulnerability, everydayness also includes failure. And to experience that sense. To take the ordinary serious as a paramount part of reality. So, and oh my goodness, you'll go out here and say, oh, the ordinary, send me back to the ordinary. So, but let's go and experience it in a new, extraordinary way. So, I want to show you this etch by Rembrandt. It's about the good Samaritan. So, and typically Rembrandt very beautifully executed this Bible story. The triangle, see the triangle? The innkeeper, the rich man, the person on the horse, the little boy. But you can't enter this edge without passing a defecating dog. Do you see? So it's this, Rembrandt was so clever in thinking about this. This hugely important story about a good Samaritan. And then, for you to get to the essence of that story, you have to pass everyday life first. And it's this kind of thing about defecating dog. Another day, another defecating dog to get passed by. So the defecating dog might be, you know, a source of some amusement to us once we see it. So, but once you get past the defecating dog, everyday nonsense, I could have expressed myself even stronger. So, this etching is a mind-boggling superb. And the message is so strong. So, you know, you have to get past the dog doing his business. The dog in itself is a controversial figure in this etching, you know, because dogs were seen as unclean animals and so forth. So this whole idea of, if you want to get to the moral high ground, you have to deal with the nonsense of everyday life. So you have to pass through. So Rembrandt, I put the ordinary back into the extraordinary and sense it in a new sense. We can't pretend doing the extraordinary, ignoring the ordinary. So let's focus again on that. So only when we acknowledge the ordinary in that moment, a metamorphosis will happen. So do you know this piece? Give me your idea about it. Bicycle circus. Yes, well, what would you say? A cow? A bull? Yes. So this is this very, very famous piece of art by Picasso. One of his most famous pieces of sculpture. So, and you know, he doesn't try to ignore the idea that it's a bicycle saddle or the handlebars, but just the way he put it together makes a new image. And it's significant. When was this done? In 1942, during the Second World War. So, and you know, Europe was busy killing themselves. So it was the bleakest of times, the joie de vivre of the 20s. You know, it was all gone. So Europe was a heap of rubble. And then he walked past this heap of stuff. And he took out of it the saddle and the handlebars. And he made this exquisite work. That's kind of, you know, just one of the most important pieces of the modern art movement. Let me read to you what he said. Guess how I made this bull's head? One day, in a pile of objects, all jumbled up together, I found an old bicycle seat right next to a rusty set of handlebars. In a flash, they joined together in my head. The idea of the bull's head came to me before I had a chance to think. It's the sensitivity to what he saw. All I did was weld them together, but if you were only to see the bull's head and not the bicycle seat and handlebars that form it, the sculpture would lose some of its impact. So you kind of have to see that it's a bicycle seat and handlebars that make up the sculpture. So the we want to make is that out of the ordinary, something really extraordinary can be done if these things are in a relationship, a particular relationship to each other. So a particular configuration to each other. Consisting as it does of only two elements, in Bull's head there's no attempt to play down the real world identity of the constituent parts. The bicycle seat is a bicycle seat, the handlebars, the handlebars. Indeed, the sculpture's reductiveness and simplicity draw attention to order, but making, in relation to each other, it an extraordinary. So, maybe this could inspire you. So, a carer, a glass of water, a carer, a cleaner, a broom, and so forth. So, the relationship to each other, with management, with the carer siblings, and so forth. Okay, so let's quickly move on. The whole idea of finding joy in the ordinary. I now want to share with you another case. And this case is called the petit problem, the small problem, the petit problem. This is a story shared by Helen Corman. She's a care ethicist in Germany. So Helen did something fascinating. She looked at the minutes of ethics committees. So, and then she did a discourse analysis on these minutes of ethics committees. So I want to share with you one story in one of these review committees, minutes, and Helen's discourse analysis of these minutes. So, two ladies in a room, one critically ill, the one sleeping. So, and then the nurse and the doctor. The doctor requests the nurse to warm the blood bottle on the sleeping older person's tummy. So this is the story. And I see all the frown. So the doctor requests the nurse to warm the blood bottle, cold blood bottle, on the sleeping lady's tummy. The nurse refused. Right. So, and said she really can't, intervene in this older person's sleeping pattern. My goodness, sleep is part of quality of life, and so forth, and so forth. She just can't do it. And then this tension between the doctor and the nurses amongst us will know, it developed into a real power issue, hierarchy, and so forth. So, and then both the nurse and the doctor submitted this complaint to the ethics committee. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you the verbatim discussion of the ethics committee. So the minister, the nurse complained to Germany, the minister, Mrs. Carr. That is really uncomfortable to get a cold something on your bed. The pastor kind of put the case on the table. So the physician, Dr. Kraft, this is absurd from a medical perspective. There are, of course, other technical aids that can help to warm, blood bottles and so forth. So another nurse on the committee So there are 2 doctors and 1 nurse and her master. The nurse feels as an advocate for the patient and wants to take care of her autonomy. And I think we all can agree with that. So the physician, Dr. Prof, but this is really a petty problem. So a petty ethical problem. Really. He actually wants to say, why on earth should it be, in front of us? The other physician, I think the problem emerged from hierarchy. The minister, I think they have some communication problems in that ward. The physician, Dr. Prof, but this is really a petty ethical problem. The discussions end. This is the whole discussion on this problem. So after minutes, declaring that this is a really minor problem, the minister explained that she will have to talk to the nurse who has shared concern and what should she now say. So what should I tell her? The physician. You can tell her that she did not do anything wrong within the current knowledge of practice. It's a typical kind of statement. So the physician, the other physician, and you can add that the problem had to do with hierarchy and failed communication. Well, the more I think about it, the more I feel instrumentalized by this nurse. Because this is not an ethical problem at all. The other nurse, you can tell her that she did not do anything wrong, and you can tell her about the possible hierarchy and communication problem behind. But never tell her that this is no or a small ethical problem. So, the meeting abruptly ends, people rise from their places and leave the room. The minister keeps sitting there and takes some notes. So this whole idea, if the ethics of care is about everyday life, relationships, and so forth, obviously, this is an ethical problem. So, do you wonder about a blood bottle?
Yeah.
I've also wondered about it.
What's the blood bottle?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
a water bottle? You shouldn't give it to a sleeping person, you can't feel it's too hot. It's a blood bottle, or it should be taken from the drip stand.
They just want to warm it. Yeah.
They put it on your stomach.
Yeah. Yeah, probably that's very ancient. But anyhow, so the point is, do you feel this is an ethical problem? Yes, with this sleeping person. My goodness.
She's not even warming the blood vessel, she's warming
No, for the patient. Yeah, for the other person. Yeah. So, see, these are, from a hierarchical point of view, the doctors feel this is not an issue. So, and that usually, because it's not about a relationship for them. It's about power, hierarchy, and so forth. And the moment you look at these things from a relational point of view and also a situational point of view, a sleeping older person. My goodness, can you imagine this gold bottle on her tongue? Anything more on this? So I find it quite a fascinating little example, and the way in which it was dealt with, kind of just pushing it off the table. So get it done. So these ethical issues about everyday life. So now the question that we addressed in the other session. Is care based on reciprocity? What do you think? To a certain extent,
Because if you're not getting anything back to, I'm putting him in a nursing thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So example, if I'm personally not somebody, and all I get from her is complaints and moans, but she's not going there very often, so then they wouldn't get the care.
Yeah.
So yeah, just,
Especially within the world of frail care, is it always possible to get something back from
No,
care?
it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's making a face on that.
Yeah. See, so the ethics of care goes beyond reciprocity. You know, I even see that with regard to downward care by gogos, their unemployed children and grandchildren. So you would think that the sacrifice they made, you know, getting that multi-generational family going, the children unemployed, the grandchildren, will result in kind of gratefulness? Not necessarily. But when I ask these grandmothers, you know, why do you then still do it? Why do you still keep on? You know, because I have to. You know, that.
But that,
You know.
that's also my point, is that you get satisfaction, not necessarily from being thanked. You get satisfaction as a care partner because you see some success in what you implement.
The bigger picture.
A bigger picture is
Yes.
infinitely more satisfying than donkey.
Could we then say it's a kind of a delayed reciprocity? Maybe not with this one, but, you know, if I look with hindsight back, there was actually quite a lot I got out of it. So, that we should not, it's not exchange, tit for tat. So it's more a delayed reciprocity. So you have to see the whole picture.
Can just build the caregiver's own self-esteem, a feeling of worth, of doing the job well.
Yeah.
Yeah, of being not it.
I'm not saying for thanks. I'm not
Yeah.
saying for thanks.
Yeah.
If you get no reaction,
Yeah.
you're rather going to be with the person you're getting some reaction from.
Yeah.
So there is reciprocity going.
Yeah.
Without that, if you were just looking after people that you had absolutely nothing from, you would really burn out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Tell
what
me,
parents
to
will
get
just
something back.
children have to deal with.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be a terrible thing to be a parent and just blankness in some instances from your child. But you're dealing with it and you have to every day.
Yeah.
And everyone's motherly thing is to get something back, and I'm good as child, I can't relate.
Yeah, but that's for your child.
Yeah, but
And what child are you doing?
even
Even
a child is normal,
Mm.
you want to knock his back and go home sometimes.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have. It's my kids, thank you very much.
So, do you somehow address these issues, you know, about reciprocity and that you don't always get a tit for tat kind of back in your training? So, yeah.
It's in the workplace and it's the clinical environment must be unconditional. I don't expect anything back.
Yeah. But in the care, the ethics of care, we focus on this relational thing.
But it's about giving
Yeah.
and receiving
Yes.
care, so that as well as receiving care, the older person wants to be able to give care and can do it in a multitude of ways, small little ways. It's in the ordinary, as you say.
Yeah.
Very
So,
nice.
you know, helping their neighbour or pushing a wheelchair of their neighbour, whatever, or looking after a bird or looking after a plant. It's about giving care, and I think that reciprocity is there, but it
Yeah.
needs to be activated.
depends. I think the important thing is that we don't confuse exchange, that's more a tit for a tat thing, and reciprocity. Delayed reciprocity and so forth. You know, there's this beautiful problem in Ghana on aging, actually, and reciprocity is hugely important, you know, in Africa. I think it's the most important concept. So, whether it's delayed or in which case. So, whichever case. So, this proverb is, I was there when you cut your teeth, you will be there when I lose mine. So I think that's that it's delayed, you know, it's not immediate. So, but over the life course, you know, somehow things will balance out somehow. So, care based on reciprocity, huge meaning, you know, it's this direct kind of thing. So those incapable of returning care would never receive care they need. Think, you know, Alzheimer's patients, really frail patients, and so forth.
But they would receive the care, the necessary care.
Yeah, the basic.
Yes.
That goes back to the previous point.
Yeah, yeah.
So we
Yeah.
as the ethics as a trained nurse or as a caregiver who works in an environment where you sign up for volunteering, you choose it as a profession. How can we cannot base our job on waiting for somebody to be nice to you to look after them. You take an oath, whatever, if you don't defer the full training route about becoming a professional person. Otherwise, we have to be the examples to the carers. And especially in where people are with dementia and frailty, they are in no position to make you happy every time. So, as a professional person, you must know, you mustn't expect anything. That's actually what it comes to boils down to. You cannot expect that if that person is damn difficult or whatever, the fact of the matter is they've actually got an excuse, they've actually got a medical diagnosis. Now we are here to, if you take it only medically, then that's the reason why they're here. That's why they pay us to look after them. So unfortunately, this culture of it is not, in my mind, it's not applicable here because it's a professional job that we do. So we've got no excuse for not, yes, the nicety of it. Nice people you can keep nicer, but you actually get your reward from people that are nice to you, but you don't expect people to be nice to you. It's amazing when you treat a difficult person nicely, how they actually change. Because they pick up on the moment and your presence in the moment and all those kind of things. But there's almost a culture that slips in of avoid you if you're not nice to deal with. And that is there's no excuse for that in a professional environment.
Yeah, but this is exactly the issue that will have to be addressed in an ethics of care, you know, because kind of spontaneously we look for the tit for the tat thing. You know, it's just kind of too much.
Yeah, it's no good saying it's a professional thing you have to do. Then you're doing your duty.
Yeah.
That you're going back to doing your duty. It has nothing to do with care.
But now the question is, if you're just doing your duty, in that really very basic sense, the question is that still good care?
No. That's what I'm saying, the person will get that care, no matter what. But the relationship's right.
Yes. Yeah.
There'll be no relationship, there'll only care.
You know, what a tragedy that we're at this stage in the care world that we have to really qualify care.
Yeah.
You know, in Dutch, it's kind of zorgzame zorg. No? So what is it in Afrikaans? Zorgzame zorg. Like, ek weet. So, and in English, you know, of course, they lately have to qualify good care, compassionate care, person-centered. But interestingly, I'm so glad you mentioned it. The ethics of care approach wants to move beyond the person-centered care, right?
Well, here will be
The
having
relational.
person-centered yet.
Yeah.
We still have problems into trying to get to personal
Yeah.
centered.
Yeah.
We want to go beyond that, we'll be dead.
Yeah. So, beyond the person-centered to the relational kind of thing. So, I just don't know how you deal with care if there are not, these relationships. Given South Africa's context of socio-economic issues, we deal with this at university. I promise you, at the Vaal Triangle campus, where I'm drawing on people from Sebokeng, Boypaton, it's the poorest of the poor students. We don't get students of the quality of University of Cape Town or Stellenbosch or whatever. So we deal with ordinary, poorest of the poor kids. But our point of view will do for these kids the best we can. We have to feed them. We give food. So we've got a huge project now, and if you're interested, please come involved. But we've got a huge project now on sanitary health for girl students. So is that the task of a university? Is that the task of a professor or a lecturer? No, okay. But it's a relational thing, the ethics of care. We want to create a caring environment, because a caring environment is an enabling environment. That kind of thing. So that's in our country, that's the way we have to do it. So given the complicated socio-economic context. So that's why I started with that reality. That's the space in which we move now. Good. So that was interesting. So how do we ensure everyone gets the care they need? Of course, we can't do it all personally or individually. We need these networks of care. Instead of a reciprocal contract, we build on a community of care. Ideally, I just don't know how this relates to the practice. So as long as no one is exhausted in their capacity to care and no one is not giving care, then the goal has been accomplished. So, but I know it's much easier said than done. How do we, and I come back to that again, how do we incorporate this whole idea of the burnout care, or the care that just today, I just can't do today. So, do we have space for that? Please help me with that. Because we all get to that point where we just feel that today is just really Do you provide that flexibility somehow?
No, my sister's story is amazing. I mean, she reads it and time out.
Okay.
Yeah, she's good.
But, that's exciting. Of course it can be abused. Somehow. Yeah.
Sister's story is
See, but, you should know your people.
I think on the West Coast, that's a real big challenge. Because it's really, there's nobody that in training, there's nobody that help them. They're all mothers, they're all people, family problems and challenges.
So no respite. That's
That's a real challenge.
So I would really find it fascinating, especially in an organization where there's a respite policy or something like that. So, because I think an ethics of care would like, to introduce that balance.